first time around. So I'll just I'll just do
It
that.
says it's live here, but do
Yeah,
the
I'm just
same
gonna
thing you did last time.
yeah, I'll just go out and go straight back in again. There we go. So we are live.
Yes, we
Uh,
are.
and this is an evening of metaphysical speculation with Dr. Lenny Thyme for the next hour or so. My name's Dennis. I'm kind of hosting and asking naive questions and just generally chit chatting. Um, so Lenny, do you want to go straight into the philosophy, or should we start with something else?
We can go straight into the philosophy. I think you asked me about agency, so why don't you
Yeah,
rephrase your question?
right. So I'm having a conversation about whether personal agency, even exists in the philosophy groups, because they've got this concept of a thing called the socio, which is the kind of relationships in between people. So they put agency in between. They kind of put everything in between and take it off the individual, and that way there's no personal agency. It's just people responding to things, which kind of makes sense in its own way, but it's not necessarily how the world look. It's not how it looks on immediate kind of just looking at it. It doesn't look that way, but it's an idea that we're just playing with, and some people think it's a real thing. Some people think it's not, but we haven't come to any kind of conclusion. We're just having a conversation about where the agency might be and whether it actually exists or not.
There is no agency. We want what's best for you. And so the controllers of the world seem to think that they enable agency, but they really don't. I mean, what is agency exactly? Is it the empowerment of individuals? Because at this point, I don't see that happening from a global scale down to human scale. It seems to me that we should be reworking things from a human scale to grow up so that the first thing that the systems worry about is the human okay? And we don't have that. Right now, we have systems that are designed to control the humans. And so I don't think there is agency.
Yeah, well, my kind of discussion point, my argument was that if if personal agency doesn't exist, so if I assume that I've got personal agency at the moment and I give it up, if I put it into the in between, the socio or whatever, give it to something else, then I'll lose my ability to stop myself from being manipulated. So that's more or less what you're saying. It's like you're saying we're being manipulated, therefore we don't have agency.
Yeah, the mindset that we get ourselves into is what controls the agency. And if we give up our our status as individual humans and start taking on a collective agency like they want, it doesn't leave for personal agency. But then there's the other agency, the one with three letters, and they sometimes worry me because I think they're out of control.
Yeah, all the three-letter agencies are definitely out of control. Don't think there's any doubt about that. Uh,
How we
so
get the same word to define both is sort of interesting. I think it's deliberate obfuscation.
could be, could very well be, or it's putting the agency in the institution rather than the individual, which is
Deliberately, yes.
yeah. So that's another way of saying the socio is what's doing all the work with culture and stuff. So it's a nebulous kind of concept. It comes from Deleuze in the 1960s or 70s, I think. But they were on mushrooms, so they use mushrooms as an analogy for everything, which means that they're seeing everything as hidden, and only the fruit is what you see, and then the underlying network is hidden. That's
Yeah,
kind of the idea.
everyone is kept in the dark and shoveled a lot of shit, which is what a
Yeah, something
mushroom
like
is
that.
about.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So it's kind of a nebulous kind of philosophical concept that people just project things onto. I think as much as anything, people want to make the socio evil when a lot of the times it's not evil. It's doing something to compensate for something else, or it's doing something that's necessary at the time that then becomes institutionalized.
Come again with how you're defining socio.
It's the relationships between people. What they're saying is it's a source. It's the in between. It's the relationships that produces the desire and the ambition and the attitude and everything that humans have. So he's taking it out of the personal people and putting it into some kind of nebulous conceptual space.
Okay. I work in a field that I call sociochemistry, and it takes the principles of chemistry and applies them to human relations, but it's a hybrid of social engineering and chemistry, using the chemistry to provide the mathematics and the basis set so that things like all equations are balanced if they're true. Makes sense to me because a true equation does require to be balanced, but balance is not necessarily just a level seesaw. There's a lot of things that go into balance, and I think that reforming the system to be human centric and operated by all humans on earth instead of having a top down dictatorship which is controlled by small groups of connected individuals is the way that will have to go. Having said that, I probably put a nice bullseye on the target of Dr. Lenny.
Right. Well, my kind of thought is it to get to that place where humans are at human scale, then humans have to have agency. They have to have some kind of agency. So the next step, the next step logically from that is that if you're in a situation where you don't feel like you've got agency, you need to claim it. You need to claim that you've got agency, or make a decision, or have an imagination that you've got agency, and then produce it from your imagination or something. If imagination creates reality.
Well, it's one of those things that belief does create reality. Because if you don't believe something, it doesn't work the way you don't believe it. And so, for things to work, you have to have a belief. And if you change your belief, sometimes things that used to work no longer work because you've mentally changed your attitude and you really don't think they'll work.
Right? Yeah. No, I mean, this is kind of the same discussion we've been having in a philosophy group, different language, but it's the same type of ideas. So my thing is, imagine if imagination creates reality, then we can generate agency. You can imagine yourself with more agency than you feel like you've got now. You can imagine
I
yourself in a place. Yeah.
I feel I have total agency. I can do whatever it is that I want to do when I want to do it. The mechanisms might be stacked a little bit. I have to make arrangements for things to be in place, but I've never had the idea that it wasn't me controlling the doorknob when it twists and opens the next room?
Yeah, I mean that's I don't know how you explain that with the socio. It's just you can't, can you? It's just there's no way to explain that without having agency in people. And just
Unless,
the fact that people get up and have breakfast, you need some kind of agency to prepare breakfast and eat breakfast.
yeah, and if you don't eat breakfast and you stop eating, your system seems to decompose and stop feeding it things. But there are people who are called breatharians who don't eat and seem to function perfectly well. So if you believe you have to eat in order to survive, you don't miss a meal. But if you have no link between survival and food, you can go forever and not need the food. I wonder if once you take food, it causes something that makes you need to eat from then on in. But I know the breatharians that I know don't eat, and they function perfectly well as human individuals.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who doesn't eat. I know people who don't eat very much, but I don't know anybody who doesn't eat at all. But and I got sick, but then my thought process when I was getting sick was that I needed to eat. So it could have been the belief in needing to eat that caused me partly to get sick, to be nauseous and what have you.
It would be hard to tease that out experimentally, but one of the problems we have with soft science is that people make theories that can't be challenged by basic experimentation. And so, if there's no way of collecting valid information that your theory is good or bad, you can have the theory, but it's just a theory. I think that scientific laws have been taken from theories that seem to work, but that we have been fed a kind of science that serves the people who don't want us to have agency, and that we should question our scientists and our soft scientists, the sociologists, the psychologists, the economists, and our humanitarians, humanities people. And let's get everybody on the same page using words that mean the same thing, and then we can discuss how things work. But individual belief in how things work really can't be broken without doing damage to the individual. So it's worth listening to how people function from their own experience and shedding the idea that big groups like government or the legal system or other things work for us individuals. They don't. They work to keep the system in place, and the current system is badly broken.
Yeah, man. When I think about the times when I felt like I didn't have agency, it's when I was sick and when I've been drunk. So those are the times that obviously you have to rely on somebody else. You have to rely on other people to do what you need to do. So, but I still had access to people who would do that, but I didn't have it individually. So that would be more of a definition of the socio. It's like the social services type of deal. So the social worker was acting as kind of my agency to push me to do the stuff that needed to get done because I didn't have the motivation to do it because I was just too sick. And
That's a formal structure built into the current system. So
yeah,
it really works to take agency away from the individual. And it depends on what you want to do. There are certain things that individuals may do, but don't necessarily ought to do, but they'll do it anyway because their personal agency says to do it, and they can wreak havoc on other individuals' personal agency. But the expression of agency from a group of people top down to an individual, that's it shouldn't be that way. Individuals should figure things out for themselves. Then again, we have a lot of individuals who we call NPCs, non player characters, and they don't think for themselves and don't have the capacity to think for themselves. So giving them agency is probably not a good thing. But then I said giving them agency or granting agency. We don't do that. Agency is something that you assume from your own personal being, not something that's given to you.
Yeah, I agree with that. It comes from a I don't I think well there's obviously more than one level of, of agency. There's agency that's coming from the social structures. There's agency that's coming from a personal kind of basis, and then there might be agency that's coming from God or whatever, some kind of extra sensory thing that we can't quite grasp. I don't know.
Yeah, the three-letter agencies come from God. That's a good one.
Yeah. Uh, but it's there's more than one. There's obviously more than one expression of it. So uh, I wouldn't put personal agency as the social structures, but it is some kind of agency on my behalf. So it still kind of belongs to me. And I had to argue a little bit to maintain my personal kind of capacity and freedom because they were taking away all my decisions for me. And that wasn't really the idea. When I agreed to a social worker, it's the social worker acting on my behalf. It's not the social worker making the decisions for me. So that's a problem when it comes to that type of situation. But I kind of kicked up a fuss a little bit and it calmed down. But the problem was my mother and the social worker ganged up against me, and then there's two people in the room and me, and I went, all right, I'll do what you say, and then I just didn't do it. So I still had the agency, I still had the ability to say no. I just didn't say no at the time, and then sorted it out afterwards because it was just easier than getting into a confrontation. But that's not necessarily the best way to solve the problem. I should have just stood up for myself, but I didn't have the energy at the time.
Well, you were sick and supposedly had trusted in the social worker. That trust might have been misplaced. But I don't know. We know some social workers who are strong, motivated people, and they feel that they know better than people who haven't been trained in the socio. And that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to overlap sociology and chemistry and get some sort of form basis into the structure, because otherwise it's just what people think. But it seems to me that chemists have the solutions, and right now we're in a game of circle the drain. And so until the water actually goes down the drain, we're in circle the drain mode, and that doesn't do much for individual agency.
Yeah, the other thing that I need to follow up on is the idea of non-player characters. So there's what about 60-70% of people are really kind of background characters.
Hard to say. I think it depends on the individual timeline you're on. that some things have diverted in time off of the current timeline that Dennis and Lenny share, and that maybe more than 60 or 70% are NPCs. But there's another world that functions in this same narrative and paradigm where those NPCs are actually active cognizant beings, and Dennis and Lenny are the NPCs because we've been muted out and placed in places that have us working within the system with absolutely no agency because our consciousness is here on this timeline with full agency.
Right. So it's kind of it's a timeline split effectively that's creating the NPCs. Or
And possibly more than two timelines. I think that we can imagine that there were timelines where certain events didn't occur, and therefore, because they didn't occur, that timeline took a tangent from the narrative that we are on within the paradigm. But different timelines could have the same paradigm, but slightly different narratives keyed around events or circumstances that act like nodes. So, in this paradigm, in 2001, two planes hit the Twin Towers in New York and those towers collapsed. In timelines where they didn't collapse, that was a tangent. And a lot of the people who are NPCs here might have taken that tangent. Another tangent might be that Trump and Biden didn't have a rig election. And so the 2020 election was Trump beating Biden. And that took us off on a different tangent that went to war, exploded the planet, and those souls aren't around anymore except here as NPCs. But how consciousness works to take us as individuals and purport us over time, that's something we really ought to look at again because the explanation we have been given on space time doesn't hold water for me.
no, I've got some issues with space time myself. But generally speaking, I don't think anything really exists in space time. I don't think space time exists. But I can't prove it. I can't prove it. It's just that's an intuition that I had on a Sunday morning when I was thinking about galaxies and gravity and all sorts of things that all turned out to be one thing.
Star Trek Next Generation had a holodeck that could recreate different realities, and I just like that concept. I don't think that universe works in a reality that's preset. I think that we're always in the moment, but the way the moment works is that the previous moment has to be contiguous into the current moment. And so you don't have a director just go, that's a wrap. Let's go now to Star Trek uniforms and the space consciousness. But there's no reason why that couldn't be. And we're just the human consciousness in the battle of philosophy on earth. And as soon as we get that philosophy down to where it works, we move to a different narrative within a different paradigm, or maybe a different narrative within the same paradigm at a different individual point in time. But I think each of us has an individual timeline, and they're connected like coaxial cables to each other, so that unless you're working outside of time, you're influencing the collective time. And that collective time, I don't know, it seems to have a single paradigm with many narratives, but we wouldn't see other paradigms from within this paradigm because we're embedded in it. So the assumption that there's only one paradigm, it's it can't be proved one way or another with the way we deal with things. So it's not falsifiable. It's not really something that we can have a discussion in philosophy that'll nail on the head what's going on because it's ever changing.
Yeah, and I think when you think about it though, there's got to be more than one. Set it because you're talking about formulas of some formulas that are behind reality ultimately. So if reality is an experiment of some sort, if reality is some kind of like testing ground or development space or whatever, which it looks like it probably is of some sort, then you wouldn't just do one experiment, you would do more than one and see which one works, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but the way I see timelines working is it's continually kicking off tangents. And sometimes those tangents bend around and come back into the paradigm, but other times they create a new narrative and there's no coming back. So the individuals whose consciousness has been altered by having being on that tangent that is actually the new reality for them, they're not here. That's what creates the NPC. And it once the tangent is taken, there's no real necessity to stay in the paradigm because the paradigm's been broken. So let's say that there's 12 different earth cycles within the zodiac where every 2200 years that same cycle starts again. And let's say that every 12 cycles earth blows up and there is no way of doing it. And so there's a new Earth born, and it creates a new 12th cycle that goes through 11 more cycles until it comes to the 12th and blows up again. But let's say that conscious individuals on Earth have taken agency and that this time the Earth is not going to blow up. Most people's timelines are on Earth blows up sequence. But for those of us who are embedded in the new narrative, that the paradigm is that the earth is living, it has figured out how to communicate with humans in a symbiotic fashion that the earth is not going to blow up this time. Everyone who is now on earth gets to move past that symbolic barrier, which, oh, by the way, was defined as a barrier in seeing through time for Project Looking Glass, which is another one of those three-letter agency type of deals. And so, if for some reason we're in a new tangent where the earth doesn't blow up and our cognitive beings are here, that means we got out of that 26,000 year cycle.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, which means does that make it a higher level on the spiral, or the same level going round again, or is it a
I
spiral that's
would,
ascending? Or,
it might even create a new spiral. Uh, I don't know. It's one of those things where we can speculate anything, and our reasoning ability will try to define something that is workable. And we're playing in the dark, sort of. I think that a lot of the basic tenets that we believe now as humans on Earth need to be questioned again in, because they're breaking down. Like the concept of space time or all the Newtonian physics based on E equals mc squared? What if they had it right and there was an ether and that alchemy actually was useful in a predictive basis, that they didn't need specific sciences? And then sometime about the turn of the 20th century, they came in, wiped out what was on the world, changed the paradigm, and over several generations set up this idea that the human construct was based on populations of cities that gathered together in countries and were working towards a new world order. And that if individual people rejected that, that could be conflict, and that conflict could in fact lead to the new tangent that we have now taken. But each time we make a different decision, there's several possibilities. We can maintain the perspective of the tangent, or we can break the perspective of the tangent and go back to the old way. Although the further the tangent gets out, the more difficult that would be. Or we could make new choices within that tangent that break that off into smaller timelines. And if there's one timeline that will work in a way to save things, maybe it does. And that later on, individuals from tangent timelines would be teleported back into the new basis set of information timeline that changes everything we thought we knew and gives us a more correct picture.
Right. Okay. That kind of makes sense in its own way.
Time is one
Yeah,
of
I don't know
those
what.
things that's really funny. I don't think each person has the same length of time in a second. I think some people can work with a lot of time in a second, and for other people, the seconds just blend together and there's no time at all. And that the time constant for an individual is different, but it's normalized so that humanity is given physics that has been totally normalized. Normalized means averaged. And so we have a
Yeah.
speed of light that is fixed when it's obvious that different wavelengths have to be traveling at different speeds to maintain the integrity of the time unit called the second.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we could do way better if we invented new clocks and new calendars and measured time differently. But that's not going to happen because the powers that be make profit from running time the way it is.
Yeah. I think it's hypnotic as well. The way that it's said, structured. It's all. I've said this before, so I don't know whether I've said it here or whether I've said it in other places on my podcast or whatever. But the cycles of the sun and the moon, which is basically what we're running, well, what a clock is a kind of representation of the cycles of the sun and the moon, and it's hypnotic. It becomes kind of a limitation. So I think time is a limiter. It's a limiting factor on human consciousness because of the cycles of the sun and the moon.
Yeah, it seems to me that the current calendar has been very much manipulated, but the teachings of how we got to this current calendar are involved in the sun and the moon. And it's sort of funny how September, where Sep means seven, is the ninth month, and October, where Oct means eight, is the 10th month. And that tells me that there was a significant change in the calendar at some time. And I think the calendar right now, as it works in 7-day weeks, split into 2 days off and 5 days working, and then 2 days off and 5 days working, and then 3 days off and 4 days working, and then back to 2 and 5 is just rhythmic enough to throw off humans' natural rhythms, and that being in a calendar system that doesn't allow natural human rhythms to resonate is part of the problem that we're facing.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And it's the way it's all set up. It's all Babylonian, basically, isn't it? It comes from Rome and Babylon. And the reason September is the seventh is seven, but it's the ninth month, is because the Roman year used to start at the end of March. It used to start at the solstice, at the equinox, spring equinox, because that's where the astrological year starts. So that was the way the year was set up, but it shifted when we moved into Christianity, and then moved everything to December and January to match up with whatever was going on with Christianity and Mithraism and all those things in the Roman Empire.
Well, I guess one of the basic questions that needs to be resolved is whether the earth is a living entity. And if it is, it should be growing and it's on its own time schedule. And the overlap of humans with the earth is one of a matter of scale, where the scale of earth is there's one earth that contains all humans, but each human is a member of all humans. Are there other earths that are members of all earths, so that there's an average paradigm for all earths and individual paradigms for each earth? And that on that scale, earth consciousness is essentially the equivalent of human consciousness on human scale?
Yeah, I think it definitely, well, it's a combination of all the things that are living with consciousness on the earth ultimately. Because it has to be. It has to be a combination of all of those things. Um,
We know
one of
that
the Go ahead.
vibration is real important, and that different frequencies resonate with each other, and some frequencies don't resonate with anything. And it seems to me that that type of system of resonance would make communications possible over various scales. And so maybe the scale that we're on can be humanized, normalized to humans, such that every different scale has a consciousness that believes it is a human consciousness, but we're the only scale of human consciousness that are digital bipeds with 10 fingers and so forth. And that maybe on other levels of scale, the perception of self is way different from what human self perceive ourselves to be, but the complexity of consciousness is really the same. It's just taking a different form.
Yeah, and then we've got to factor in instincts as well to some extent, because instincts, if people are running on instinct a lot of the time, then then does instinct count as agency, or is it responding to something that's, well, it's responding to something that's welling up, but it's not conscious in the same way as agency would be.
I don't know. I watch examples of instinct being my cat hunting the birds outside, and it'll occasionally come in with a bird, but is cats hunting birds a form of agency for cats? Or is it a form of agency for birds? Or is it a form of agency for humans that watch the display?
I don't know the answer to any of those questions, but something to think about. Definitely something to think about, because if you don't factor in instinct, then you've got to put it somewhere. So does it go in the agency category, or does it go in the non-agency category? I don't know if there is a non-agency category.
Well, maybe the way that things work is through an ontological perspective, that the universe being alive at an even greater scale than the earth being alive can decide for itself what its agency is, and that deflects down to earth level agency, which deflects down to human level agency, which maybe deflects down to microbe level agency. And yet, the consciousness of each of those different agencies is the same consciousness focusing on a different level of work with changes in the narrative and the paradigm. Or maybe we can hold the paradigm and the narrative and just have it work on different scales, and then the ontology decides which scale it worked best on, and that's the way it works in the future.
Yeah, so it's an interesting idea. At the very least, it's worth thinking about.
There is a question in my mind also: is there a future? I mean, the way we've got time set up, obviously, we are growing through time, getting older, and seeing things that happened in our experience manifest in different ways. But what if that's all an illusion and that the only time we're present in is the now? And the now can change at any moment. But as long as our belief in the now is that we exist in the now, it's not going to change.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I'm not a fan of past and future at all. Really, I don't think they exist in my memory or whatever, or in my imagination, but not as a thing. Well, I think the perception of time is a tricky thing anyway, but because I think it's all kind of illusion, really. But I can't obviously I can't prove any of that. It's just my the conclusions I've come to when I've been thinking about things on usually on a Sunday afternoon when I've got too much time on my hands.
I'm I'm comfortable where I'm at. I believe that I've had a couple of near death experiences, then returned to this specific narrative and paradigm. And my conclusion is that there's something I need to do that is paradigm shaping within the narrative. And so that I am almost immortal here within here. You can kill me, but like the next day, I'm going to wake up like in the movie Groundhog's Day. And
Yeah,
it's going to be the same thing the same way, and it's only my illusion of time that changes the perspective.
yeah. It all depends on what kind of model you're using, what kind of metaphor you're using for time. So can you change time by changing the metaphor you use? And you actually change the way you interact with time by changing that metaphor.
Yeah, one of the metaphors that I found that helped me personally change time was Dr. Seuss in Oh, the Places You Can Go, which had a portion of the book dedicated to the waiting place. And the waiting place was where time stopped because there was something that the individual anticipated to be coming that was so great and so looking forward to that it took forever to get there. So people got stranded in the waiting place and they were waiting for the train to come, or you know how Dr. Seuss works in riddles and rhymes. But the man was definitely writing philosophy for adult humans. And the fact that we have children's stories from Dr. Seuss, and just look at how the end of Go Dog Go ends. Do you like my hat? Yes, I do like your hat. And suddenly the paradigm of the world changes.
Right. So I'm not read that one. The Cat in the Hat I'm familiar with, but I think that's about as far as I got with Dr. Seuss. Can't
Oh, the
remember any.
cat
I
in
used
the
to like
hat was wonderful.
yeah, I used to do Asterix books and Tintin books more than Dr. Seuss.
I remember a cartoon when I was growing up, which were Hershey's Adventures of Tintin.
Yeah, upstairs, those are the ones. We used to
Yep.
fight over the books when I was about 6 or 7, 8 maybe. We had one copy of Explorers on the Moon between 30 kids. So we just used to fight over it. I remember that clear as day. And somebody would always get it for months and months on end and not give it up. But eventually everybody gets around to reading it, don't they? But it just takes a bit of time. Once it's freed up, then it starts to circulate again. It's the same with everything. It's like it's an idea. People hold on to ideas, and then eventually they'll change the metaphor they're using, or they'll change the way they perceive something, or something will shift, and they'll be able to let go of it, and then it just moves on.
I wonder what they thought about as outer space before the paradigm changed with H.G. Wells and Journey to the Moon.
But they got the canals on Mars right, I think, all those years ago. Was that 150 years ago or more? 200 years ago,
Yeah,
nearly.
he also got the concept of submarines right, which
Yeah,
doesn't it tells me that the modern time stream is based on science fiction, and that as long as we can hold that to be true, we're getting the Jetsons instead of the Flintstones. But every so often the earth goes back to the Flintstones and we have to reset and start it up again. And maybe the 1902 reset was rigged, and that some people knew it was coming, got out of the way, survived, and changed things. And that pre 1902, we had what's now referred to as the Tartarian Empire, and buildings that look like the Capitol or most courthouses that were made for different purposes in a previous paradigm that was destroyed because the powers that be found a way to slip around the time barrier.
yeah. I'm not all that familiar with the Tartaria idea, but again, it's an interesting idea. The old lost civilization idea. I'm more familiar with Atlantis than I am Tartaria, but I think it's the same principle. It's just a lost lost kind of paradise or whatever. It's an idea of putting something better in the past that we've fallen from.
It's a story, and the winners of the wars get to write the stories, but they don't get to perpetrate them. And so people who've only had this story of the current world as it is don't have a perspective of what else might be until it comes in sideways. And right now, I think we're off track. Excuse me for a minute. I need a glass of water.
No worries, Lenny. I shall fill in for a couple of minutes. So we're coming up to 50 minutes, and you're listening to an evening of metaphysical speculation. We do this more or less every week. We might have to skip a week next week because I'm in hospital. I'll be doing dialysis on a Thursday, so instead of Friday, and then I've got an operation on Friday. So I've got a plastic tubes between my bladder and my kidneys, and they need to be changed every 4 months. And this is the time coming up now where they've got to be changed. So we might skip next week, or I might potentially set something up on Friday, depending on how I feel on Friday. If I get out of hospital in time, then I could potentially set something up. Or we could do it on Saturday. That would work just as well.
I'm
Maybe.
open. We can do it anytime. And if we want, maybe we can get somebody to talk about ideas. I know some Tartarian experts who might want to show up. Or I could just bring some very interesting people who have their own agendas, who have things to say.
Yeah, well, I'm open to that. To turn it into a round table as much as it's a kind of one-on-one discussion. Round tables are always good as well. They're interesting. You never know who's going to turn up and what they're going to say. That's the beauty of it.
That's true. And we'll just see how it all goes. Is there anything that's life threatening about your operation next Friday?
No, not really. It's a fairly standard kind of. I don't think it even takes very long, but it's just they have to knock me out, so I'll be under anesthetic. That's the only thing that might potentially cause problems, is if there's an issue with the anesthetic. But they've got it's like at least two people looking after the anesthetic, so while the operation's happening, and I'd rather be knocked out than be half awake. The last time I had an operation on my arm last year, the end of last year, and they freeze your arm, but you're conscious while they're doing it, and I didn't like that at all. That was a most unpleasant experience. It's like 2 hours of
Yeah, that
watching.
would be like it would be like trying to have agency when you don't have agency. It's easier to be knocked out and know you have no agency.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was like 2 hours of having a phantom limb because it felt like my arm was over my chest, but actually it was spread out so they could work on it. So I just could not feel anything from my shoulder down, and that caused me some problems because I had to get into this flat. I've got to go up a flight of stairs, and to get up the flight of stairs, I need to use to lean on my arm, and I couldn't lean on my arm because I couldn't feel it. So I had to ask the taxi driver to kind of help me up the stairs, which they don't always like to do. They won't always do it. But this particular guy, he's been a regular taxi driver with me, so he was quite happy to do it. But if it had been a new guy, and they wouldn't have wanted to do it, and I would have been stuck at the bottom of the stairs. So until my arm came back, which it did about an hour later or 2 hours later. But the point is that I should have been able to walk up the stairs, and they didn't tell me how long it was going to take to get my arm back, and it would cause problems getting up the stairs. And I didn't know to ask them because I didn't know it was going to happen like that. So it was tricky. That's the only thing. But that's the only thing. The anaesthetic's the only thing that might be a little bit tricky. Everything else is fair. I've had it done 2 or 3 times already before, so I know the routine. I know the time I'll get to the hospital. I know roughly what time they'll do the operation. Well, I don't know exactly what time they'll take me down for the operation, but I know how long it'll take. It only takes about half an hour. I'm only out for half an hour or so, I think.
So you'll
And
be home by the end of the evening, or will they keep you for observation?
no, they let me come home provided this. My mother will stay overnight, so she'll stay in the living room overnight. But they won't let me out without somebody being here when I get here. Because has to be just somebody to keep an eye on me.
That makes a lot of sense. I sometimes feel that I need somebody keeping an eye on me, and it doesn't take a medical procedure to do that.
Oh, no, I know that feeling. I know that feeling well. Well, we're coming up to an hour, Lenny. Have you got anything else you want to add to the conversation, or anything you want to tell people about where to find you online?
You can find me at newway.com, KNEWWEIGH, because we need to take everything we knew and weigh it again, because it just isn't making a cognizant story. Um, I'm also at minds.com as the Mad Dr. Thyme, and I have other social medias scattered about, but I'm not paying much attention to social media any longer. It's one of those things where it's part of what we do, but we've got to step through that barrier and do it more effectively, or else we just get drowned out in the crowdfunding.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, my main thing at the moment is my podcast, which is Free Association Radio Show. Anywhere you find podcasts will get you there. It's on uh, Spotify and Amazon and places like that. So that's pretty much it. We'll wrap that up at this point, Lenny. I'll set something up next weekend, and we'll get back together again. See if we can find some other people to join in next weekend, and see if we can get a round table together.
All right. Take care.
All right, man. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.